Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to another episode of The Ways We Move, the podcast that highlights innovative mobility solutions and the people behind them. My name is Nicolas Zart. I am your host for this podcast. And today we're going to talk about drones. We're going to talk about why drones are so important. And as you may or may not know, up until this year, 2025, all eyes were on passengers, eVTOLs, those electric vertical takeoff and landing machines, which we also refer to as flying cars, air taxis. Names that we're not too fond of actually in the industry because an air taxi, a taxi comes to you. You don't, you have to go to these eVTOLs. But one of the things that many of us have known for many years, especially those of us working on the infrastructure side of thing, is that we don't run in aviation. We crawl before we walk, before we run. And the one thing that we've always known, even by the way, back then in the electric vehicle days, the EV industry, the first ones to buy EVs, purely electric cars, were not people like you and me. They were fleet owners. And why? Well, that's very simple. Every day they had 40, 60, 80, 100 miles that they would do. And we got a lot of data from that. So guess what? It's the same thing happening right now in advanced air mobility or AAM. We now understand that we're not going to start flying you and me in New York City, in Los Angeles, in Atlanta, or Dallas. It's not going to happen like that. What's going to happen? We're finally getting it now. Cargo, drones. And if you know anything about our industry is very peculiar. It's fragmented, very much so. You have the drone guys on one side, you have the passenger guys on one side, and then you have infrastructure. And none of us really we kind of talk, but we don't really mesh all together because all eyes have been on eVTOLs carrying people. And now we're finally understanding, hey, no, it's going to start with cargo. It's going to start with drones. So who better else to talk about this? And someone who's been around for a long time. He started the company in 2013, and that's Ryan Walsh at Valkyrie. And always impressed me because they have such a pragmatic approach to the industry, a drone system that delivers on a sort of a think of a big mailbox systems. We'll put a video in here to explain, but think of a big mailbox system, lots of different mailboxes and a landing pad on top of it, where the drone comes down, then a little elevator takes that package, brings it to that mailbox where somebody takes it in, and then vice versa. You drop it into that mailbox, it goes up there, waits for the drone picks it up, and then sends it out elsewhere. Now, there are tons and tons and tons of application used for this, but we'll just let Ryan talk about it because Ryan has a very interesting experience, ex-military veteran, and who understands the use of drones. And for him, it always makes sense to start with drones and then scale it to passengers, which is, 15 years later, finally the industry is getting there. So I hope you enjoy this podcast with Ryan. And again, please please share, please subscribe, and also drop in your comments. We always want to hear, what do you think? Where does AAM start? Who's going to be flying first? What are the first case scenarios? What would you like to see? And again, if you know someone or you are someone who's involved, not just in advanced air mobility, but also on the electric vehicle side of things, on railroads, on the electric maritime industry, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you on the podcast. A warm thank you to all of you who have made this podcast such a success, way beyond what I had ever imagined. But we're beyond 930 downloads. We're going to hit the 1,000 downloads before the end of the year, and I can't believe it, but I mostly have all of you to thank for. So thank you for making this podcast so successful. And thank you for those of you who have already sponsored us. We look forward to that. And next, we have to get on with our Patreon site. I will work on that. But without further ado, let's go hear from Ryan. Well, hey, Ryan, thank you for being with us today on The Ways We Move. And well, let's start with an introduction. Who is Ryan?
Thanks so much for having me, Nicholas. I got started in the drone industry about 12 years ago. I had done some time in special operations where I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, had gotten out and started getting my degrees, got an undergrad in economics and my MBA. And then I had started a number of small businesses in my 20s, which I exited most of them, still only holding on to one or two of them. And I started seeing a lot of the challenges that kind of led me down the road to getting into drones back in 2013, just whether it was on the battlefield or, kind of running businesses. I realized logistics was really the lifeblood of all of it. And so led me to drones, where I started realizing that drones are going to be the future of logistics.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for your service. I think in in and of itself, that was probably an amazing training session, especially when it comes to drones. But you're one of the early people who I remember our previous conversations around understanding about drones, understanding why things would start with drones, and even way before anybody else was thinking of that. Like you said, around 2013, 14, we weren't even yet at Uber Elevate, but there was always these two clans. There was the clan on the drone side of things and then the passenger side of things. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about, how did you see it back there? How did you think about starting your company, which by the way, we also need to explain what you do with the company.
Yeah, yeah. So at Valkyrie, we build fully autonomous networks. So the landing stations is where we got our start, but have somewhat backed into building the entire thing. And that was out of demand and kind of necessity over the past few years. But it's exactly the point. We were in a lot of these early meetings 14 to 2020 timeframe. And I was blown away by just kind of some of the mindsets. A lot of these people, I think in some of our past conversations, we've spoken about, they wanted to kind of start their plans with air taxis. Right. And it just never made sense to me on why would you not test with the smallest criticality possible, right? Small cargo. The beauty of air taxis and drones is a lot of the technology is scalable. It's not that, you know, kind of obscure in that regard. It's very linear.
Yep,
And so,
true.
what you can test on a drone, almost all of those core principles can be applied to air taxis, right? And so to think that why would we put a family of four in one of these things at the biggest possible size we can fly with the most possible risk and the most possible risk to others when we can test all of these principles on something small and not as critical and not as dangerous. And so to us, it was always, you're going to have this phased in through small drones and then into larger air cargo and then into air taxis. And so, AAM spans the whole spectrum of that. It seems like a very straightforward common sense progression, but what we realized is the common sense part of that wasn't there. Most people weren't looking at that, and they were, trying to lobby for whatever their slice of the pie was. So if they were working with an AAM air taxi company, that's what they pushed for first, and
Yes.
wherever you fell. And the problem was the AAM air taxi companies were very, very well funded, and so they were an overrepresented voice at the table oftentimes. And even though they talked about projects that were certifying in 2030 and beyond, they were at the table like they were starting tomorrow, and it was
Yes.
a challenge for me to understand kind of why everybody was putting the blinders on for that. So to see kind of some of this kind of take a bit more of a realistic and pragmatic approach, I'm very happy to see. And so Valkyrie is, really working at kind of shaping that narrative wherever and however we can, to ensure that the pragmatic common sense approach is the path everybody's aiming for.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear what you say because you really hit on a few points of it. First of all, the dark side of our industry, if there is one, is first of all the separation between people working in drones and people working on PAX eVTOLs, right? Never understood why. The overemphasis on the eVTOLs carrying people and almost zero on the infrastructure, which is really ultimately that's the most important thing, right? We want to know where they're going to take off, where they're going to land. And so you've been working on both of those, on the drones and the infrastructure. Another thing too that our conversation always brings back to mind, and for me is, with the EV introduction, electric vehicles introduction in about 2007, 2008, the first thing that we should have been focusing on is the infrastructure. We didn't do that. And that cost a lot of time. And it was such an obvious thing. But who were the first ones to buy EVs? Well, fleet operators. We had 40, 60, 80 miles per day. It was predictable, got a lot of great numbers and everything. And lo and behold, only this year in AAM are we starting to talk about, hey, it's going to start with drone. Hey, infrastructure is the most important thing. So you said something that was very interesting. You're right. The very first AAM companies really stole the limelight. It was about them. It was about flying 4 or 5 people over, people's homes in New York City, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Washington, Dallas. Yeah, Washington, Dallas, and Dallas. And most of us were going, no, no, it doesn't start like that. So it was pretty amazing that you saw that from the beginning. But you're right. It was about be pragmatic. So tell us a little bit about your network. So what does it look like if we were to see it? And I'm sure we'll put a video in here to show people what you guys are doing.
Sure. Yeah. So back in 2013, what we did was turn the whole idea on its head. It seemed through our research that the drones were very well kind of handled, right? You had the big companies, especially at the time, that were still, focused on drones, even if they were some of the larger kind of, runway takeoff type drones. But we realized very quickly that if there was a market, they were going to move into it, or we'd be fighting the Amazons and Googles of the world. And that was not the market we wanted to compete in. And so by turning the whole idea on its head, and most specifically, we realized, quadcopters had been patented since 67. So we weren't going to get market cornering IP in any of those areas. And so, that was kind of a piece for us. And we were at some of our earlier attempts at getting patents, my co-inventor, Alex, and we had been on the wrong side of the Alice v. CLS Bank Supreme Court decision, where some of our software patents that were supposed to be granted ended up getting overturned kind of in that entire wave. And so it was a big piece for us to go after hardware. We wanted to make sure we could get something that was very protectable, even in a changing patent landscape. And so by turning the whole idea on its head and realizing, not just the method of delivering, but actually having a piece of hardware there was critical. And so we focused on the landing pads and all of their kind of applications and uses, both on the physical side, right? Whether that was window or rooftop or ground based, but also on the use case side, right? Whether they were,
Mm,
now DFR, it's funny, DFR has taken all the fanfare, but this is, things we've been talking about since 2018,
yeah.
2017, right? And so,
Yep.
to us on the landing pad side, we've always kind of seen a world where, these would be strategically placed and supporting, first responders and law enforcement. And so to see that be kind of this first wave of market adoption is fascinating to me. But the idea was, you know, take me as the lowest common denominator in most situations, right? I'm going to find a way to break whatever you put in front of me. I'm going to find a way to screw it up. And so, how do I, as the customer, have the easy, pain free interaction, frictionless interaction with drone delivery, right? And it immediately came to us that lockers and infrastructure were going to be a key piece of that. And so, we've spent a lot of the last decade focusing just on that and knowing how much we focus our cities, right? I mean, if you look out this window,
Yep. Yep.
everything from driveways, streets, parking lots, like so much of our cities are focused around our logistics, and whether that's rail, right? And then
Yep.
cars. So, to me, it seemed like a very obvious next step that drones were going to have their own piece of ground infrastructure to support, knowing how big the business case is.
That's true because you guys did something right from the get-go is you didn't just focus on the aircraft, you focused on the whole ecosystem and you took it even further. You focused on the whole network. And I remember seeing your very first images and very first drawings of the system. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. So this is really about drones landing on a platform with a bunch of mailboxes, for lack of a better word, and they drop the cargo. It gets shunted to whatever mailbox. And also on the sending end of it, basically, you put something in your very own mailbox, only yours and all that kind of stuff, makes its way up to the landing part, or the vertipad, I guess we can call it. Then the drone comes in, picks it up, boom, and then flies it out there. You were one of the very first ones who had actually seen the whole ecosystem from the get go, whereas
Thank you.
everybody else was either focusing on one or the other, right? So that's pretty amazing, and I always remember that impressed me a lot.
Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah. To me, it always seemed like it was somewhat of a no-brainer. And a lot of our design requirements were to mirror what we currently have, right? And so our first iteration of prototype was a single family home mailbox and really built to those kind of design dimensions for that reason, right? Knowing that, for instance, you weren't going to have a different mailbox for every provider, right? You weren't going to have a UPS and
Right.
Amazon and all this. It all had to work into one space, one
Yes.
central standardized receiving and sending, right? If it didn't
Yes.
provide the two-way asynchronous solution, it wasn't really going to be that helpful in a lot of ways. And so that was a key requirement. So we were able to drop packages in a mailbox, pretty successfully by 2018 and quite successfully by the end of 2019. But really, it was 2019 really until 2023 when we perfected sending. I mean, it was a very, very long path on the sending side. But it was so critical to the end mission that we knew every box had to be able to do both. And so, yeah, we just saw that very early on. It kind of hit us like a sack of bricks that you have to be able to do two-way asynchronous multi-tenant
Yeah.
network.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few things in there that that I'm very fond of. Being on the infrastructure side of things is agnostic, right? You got to work with everyone. You've got to have some idea of, I mean, we have a standard gauge for trains. We have standard, roadsides. I mean, all of that is so important to have. One of the things also that I remember us talking about is, for you, distance is not such a big important thing. So the technology around BV loss, and for those of you who don't know what BV loss is, it's flight beyond line of visual sight, so flying way beyond what you can see with the eyes. For you, it doesn't seem to be such a big deal, but I think for a lot of people it's been a really big deal, because they're trying to find, how can they get cargo as far out as possible. Whereas you guys were like, no, let's crawl before. Let's make sure that we have networks, and then we can go everywhere we need to go. BV loss is just pretty much the cherry on top of it. So is this something that you've always thought about, or again, it was just a pragmatic step?
The fact that BVLOS is even kind of segmented the way it is a little bit mind blowing to me, right? Like when I was in
Yes.
Afghanistan, 2004, 2005, we had drones overhead being flown by a kid in Colorado, right?
Yeah.
Like
Boom.
the
There you
technology
go.
in there. So to me, it was an inevitability. It was just, I don't understand why regulators put an 11-year hold up on it and kind of built that dam up. But the technology's always been there. It's all regulated,
Yeah.
and so for us, knowing we could do the distance in bunny hop, right? And so you would fly the more or less max range of that drone, stop, charge for the, charge time, and then keep going. And so your limitation only being the time criticality. And so if we're able to do that in theory, there's nothing that we couldn't reach. And so if we had enough time, we could theoretically get you something, thousands of
Yeah.
miles, just bunny hopping it 10 miles at a time, right? And so the distance never seemed like a barrier we had to overcome. It was more so just being able to do it, hundreds, thousands of drones at scale and do it within the regs and safely. And so, the FAA kind of winging it, so to speak, where, they haven't spent the last decade actually planning this out. It's just kind of been kicking the can down the road, is a bit of a frustration.
Yeah, that's wow. I'm having an aha moment here, because you're right. We've all been thinking about BB loss and how that's going to open up the whole market and everything, but not necessarily, because that also means one packet that goes to one destinations hundreds, thousands of miles ago. But what happens if you have a package and you distribute part of it here, part of it there, which is, pretty much how you're supposed to do. By the way, trains work the same way, right? One carriage might be dropped off and we'll go in that other direction. We'll hook up to another train. So indeed, I think that makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Plus, it also opens up another thing. You're lowering the complexity of the aircraft. The aircraft now can be purely electric. It can recharge fairly quickly because it's not flying super long ways. You don't have to work on a hybrid system. So you're actually lowering the technological threshold. That's pretty brilliant, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, that
That's my aha moment right here.
yeah, no, that's exactly it. And, one thing we found, we have a lot of, we'll say copycats, imitators, however you want to put it. And we can
Always,
always tell
always.
where they started copying us and kind of where they felt like they had gotten it, right? Every company hits that buy build moment, right? Does it make more sense for us to build a box? And oftentimes you'll have companies say, oh, we'll just do it ourselves, ignore the patents, all of that, right? And so they'll go and build it themselves. But from the outside, it looks like a box. It looks very simple and it's deceivingly so, right? I mean, I can tell you after, being in this space 12, 13 years, I'm just now thinking we're at a point where we have perfected the kind of
Hmm.
infrastructure side of it. And so, when I see people go, oh, no, it's a box, we've got it. And they come in and, they might have some of it and they'll kind of figure out the obvious stuff, but there is so much more
Yeah.
to this and the
Yes.
deconfliction of the airspace and
Yeah.
how you move certain things, right? And so we can tell, based on where their design starts breaking down or what capabilities it doesn't have, where they kind of started doing that, right? And so I find it just very interesting how many companies are out there kind of trying to take that on when the smarter and more cost effective thing to do 99 times out of 100 is go to the subject matter experts and
Yes.
trying
Don't
to
reinvent the wheel.
no, they all
Don't
do, they
reinvent the
all do,
wheel. But
right?
it's actually it's an interesting trend that I've been following. I've been working for well over 40 years. I've seen a lot of disruptive technologies take hold. And it's always the same thing, right? That attracts a lot of different mindsets. And there purists who will just do things the way it should be done. And then there are those who just want to make a quick buck, or sometimes not, whatever XYZ reasons they might have, and they're going to take shortcuts. And we're starting to see that more and more in this industry, prototypes that crash, go up in smoke completely where they really shouldn't, right? And all that kind of stuff. So we're still at a stage of the industry where we're communicating with one another. We need to continue doing that. We need to be mindful of what has done what, where, how, and where, and all that kind of stuff, and get to the table and talk and talk and talk. So I think that's a very good point what you're making there.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about the case use. What would that be good for? Who would we've said already that we start with cargo, we start with drones and everything. Who would be your ideal clients? Who are your perfect clients to start with?
So we're really focusing on healthcare just because of high criticality, high need, high impact, but we've got demand everywhere. And the craziest part to me is just everywhere we look is just an overwhelming amount of demand. And it really shows kind
Mm,
of A, how taxed our last mile logistics systems are
yes,
already, but
yes.
B, kind of, how blue of an ocean there is of opportunity here because so many people need this on so many different layers, right? And so, whether it's lawyers having to get documents back and forth between courthouse, their clients, every car parts, right? So every time you take your car in, they don't have the bolts for your 97
Yeah,
Camry, right? And so they have to order those and those have to get, taken in. If they don't get those parts that morning, right, by that courier that's taking them from the distributor, you don't get your car fixed for another day, right? And so, you look at that all the way down to pharmaceuticals, down to, the Uber Eats last mile. And so we're at a point where I think, again, last mile logistics was impacting every small business that I had in my 20s, and all of them were in very different sectors from, food and quick service restaurants all the way to, screen printing and different, those kind of small bit. And so it's just one of those general parts of life that are just ubiquitous. You are going to need things that you don't have, and you are going to need to send things that you've made, created, whatever, out to other people. So it never ceases to amaze me how many places can benefit from this, right? Ports from their security, their
Yes.
scanning of their cargo,
Yes.
the documents and passports and customs back. I mean, there's just so many applications. And so you could just name an industry, and I can sit here for a half hour for each one and go through a use case. It's crazy. And we haven't found any that don't have an application yet.
That's true. Yeah, that's exactly it. I think it can be applied to anything. I think one of the things we talked about is EMS, or even something as simple as, you're in Montana or Canada. You have these faraway communities. You're usually not linked by road. The only way to get there is to fly. And obviously a drone is ideal for that. But imagine that in that center, that town center, that village center, you have those mailboxes. You drop all the medicine that you need to have that they can't get in time and everything, and bam, voila, you have your solution there. So yeah, the applications run the gamut for sure.
Right. I mean, like, if we can improve the time between when an outbreak is suspected on our pork population versus when we can contain it, right? So the problem with
Mm.
swine flu, for instance, is you test,
Yes.
right? Most of our pigs come from Iowa, right? You test that pig when you think there's swine flu, but then you're sending it by more or less courier, or worse, regular express mail, to some testing center in Iowa City or somewhere. And then they're testing it. By the time those processes have happened, results, it's 3 days later, and you've put down an entire section of your pigs, right?
Yep.
And so if we can
Yep.
just get that time cut down, we can save thousands, tens of thousands of pig lives, right? Which is actually national security in this country, right? Like, pork is a major national security concern because it is such a large part of our kind of overall food export, all of it, right? And so just little things. And it blows my mind how many applications there are. Even if we had, for instance, what was it in East Palestine, Ohio, when that train flipped, if they had
Yes.
a drone within a few miles on station that was able to do a spectrum analysis of whatever those gas clouds or toxic hazmat
No, it's
substances that
true.
were coming out, right? Imagine how much more prepared the first responders and the different groups could have been. So there's, like, again, just so many applications no matter where you look.
Yeah, and that's such a really interesting example you use, because one of the places, one of the industries or subsegments of industries where drones are actively being used is railways. They have their own corridors. They inspect the lines, the catenaries, if there are anything like that. But you're right about that emergency responses. I've never heard them put that into action. And you're right. There was smoke bellowing. There was fire. There was this. I mean, it's easy. It's easy. It's technically possible to put a drone there with the right kind of cameras, the right kind of sensors to figure out this is registering as this is registering as that. That fire is at that temperature. Therefore, send it right back directly to the fire station, to the medical emergency response team, and whammo, you've cut down, like you said, days instead hours instead of days. Absolutely. Tell me also a little bit about dual use, because not, the more I think about it, the more your technology is you'll use. I mean, the military, have they shown interest? And I'm sure they have, but how would it serve the military for in their particular case?
So if you're looking military drones, I guess they fall into a handful of use cases, right? So when you have these SUAS, right, like the non predators, right, they're going to fall into a handful of use cases. In Ukraine, we're really seeing a lot of that, right? So you'll have your FPV drones, which are often a combination of ISR and direct action. And then you'll have the larger kind of cargo drones, they call them Baba Yagas over there, that they'll use for heavier anti-personnel payloads, as
Ah,
well as, more of a ISR type of
mm,
application. So you have these now kind of multi-domain, multi airframe type of tactics developing, especially in the past year. So what they'll do is they'll hit you with 2 or 3 FPVs, have a Baba Yaga over you, drop the mortar rounds, and then anybody squirts out, they hit them with FPVs again, right? And so I came to the realization that military missions on the Baba Yaga side are really all you're doing is doing your point to point type of deliveries, but you're just dropping the cargo halfway, right? Like it's not
That's right.
revolutionary in that regard. And so when we started looking at it through that lens, we realized every one of our systems has military applications. And so, our VQ 1600 drone, that thing carries 18 pounds. And so, that's quite a few mortar rounds. I mean, testing and playing with those right now, right?
Right. Right.
You know, yeah. So we've got a ton of military application and dual use on our system.
So has a DoD? I mean, I'm assuming you're working a bit with the DoD. What's their reaction to all of this? Because it seems like, I mean, it's a no brainer to me, at least.
Seems like a no-brainer to me. It's been more resistance than I would have suspected, but we definitely have had conversations. We can't go too deep into
Of
with who
course.
or the kind, right? But there's been, I would say, mixed interest, which I find surprising. I would have thought there would have been kind of overwhelming support.
And you know how the deals work at the Pentagon and everything. I mean, you're going up against Grumman, Lockheed, all these, super, super big companies. They have contracts. It might make more sense to, do F-35s with all of that technology than use drones, which is interesting because you mentioned the Ukraine war is actually a really good example of, what, these drones can do a hell of a lot more damage than a few, double digit billion-dollar aircraft can do. So where is that balance? But I think until we stop that way of doing business, you probably will have a little bit of resistance, but it's a no-brainer. I think at one point or another, it's a question of perseverance, and that should make it work at some point.
Couldn't agree
And
more.
surveillance. I mean, just plain old surveillance. I mean, this is something that we need now. Instead of spending a lot of money on bigger aircraft. I think right?
I
Pragmatic.
said that when I was trying to speak to the brass at the Pentagon 2018, 2019, I kept trying to explain to them their view of drones was the same way the world viewed computers in the 60s. And they kept thinking bigger and bigger and bigger. And I kept, trying to get it through like, no, no, no. When you
No.
miniaturize and micro this technology, it's going to be just like computers, right? The proliferation happens when you individualize it for each person, not condense it and build more big supercomputers and pack it into basements, right? Drones are going to be the same way. You don't want these giant airframes just flying around. You want saturation with as many little ones as possible. And that fell on deaf ears for quite a while.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Instead of, 3 big aircraft, it's better to have 300, 3,000 little ones. They're hard to track, hard to hunt down, and so you put out 5% of them. You still have 95% of them still very active, and lots of little needle sharp hits will eventually take down anything. And again, case in point, Ukraine has shown that excellently. I mean, that was really well done with off-the-shelf drones. I mean, for crying out loud, I mean, it's the ultimate way of the future. Yeah, that's a good point. I think eventually, I think it'll turn around a little bit. And I think there's a lot of focus right now on where the money is going. So I think at one point or another, we'll have a bunch of people saying, "Yeah, let's be practical about the way we spend that money. Let's get more performance out of it." Usually around now, we start to ask a little bit more personal questions, and the ones that I always like to ask is, "Ryan, what is wrong with you? What are you doing in this industry? You're a veteran. You could retire. You could consult here and there and everything, but you're taking on the arduous task of working advanced air mobility, and especially, God forbid, to be practical about it. So what's your driving motivation? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, I could have retired 10 years ago. Honestly, a sickness, I would say, a curse. It really is, but I have that just inside of me where, every morning I wake up and there's not drones flying outside my house. It bothers me because I know we can do it. I know it's possible. I
Yeah,
know that this
yeah.
very much can be improving lives every single day. And the fact that we're not doing it is crazy to me. So, I don't know. I just have that inside of me where I've got to go and make this happen every day.
Yeah, and you've been at it for a long time. You've been at it like for over a decade. You've refined it really well. And like you said, it's over the years that you can refine a system, truly refine it and not just cut corners and everything. So that's something that's been pretty amazing to see. Yeah, you're one of the earliest one in the industry and you're still there. So that says a lot. That says a lot for sure.
Thank you. I'd like to think if I learned anything being a ranger, it was that, right? You show up and do your job 110% every day. Don't complain. Just put your work
Just
in
do
and
it.
one foot in front of the other.
And Ryan, the other thing is if you don't do it, somebody else eventually will do it. So might as well be you.
Right.
Why not? That's exactly it. Well, Ryan, I wanted to thank you for being on the podcast with us today. And of course, an open invitation for you to come back whenever you want. We can talk more about everything you guys are doing, what the industry is going through. We're pretty sure that in the next 6 months to a year, things will obviously change a lot. It always does. There are a lot of new things about to happen. And I'm sure you guys will also have a bunch of new things you might want to talk about. So I wanted to thank you for being here. Maybe
So,
just one very last question. What would you like people to walk away from with today out of everything that we've talked about?
yeah, I appreciate having me. I would say the one takeaway people leave with is think about as you're going through your day-to-day lives over the next couple days, where drones will impact you most. Is it going to be at home deliveries? Is it going to be lowering the price of in-home care for loved ones that you're caring for? Is it going to impact you where you work, right? But if you see anywhere where there is opportunity, you reach out and you visit us at Valqari.com, find us on LinkedIn. But yeah, please reach out. We want to work with as many people as we can at solving this problem. So yeah, don't be hesitant to contact us.
Absolutely. And USPS would be an easy client for you guys where you don't have to send these cars that drive around everywhere. You just send drones, of course, that might replace some jobs, but then again, I've been replaced many times and I've found other jobs and you know what? We move on. That's part of life, isn't it?
I think drones are going to create as many jobs as they take away, if not more. And so I
Well
think
said.
a huge opportunity for people to upskill in this.
Well said. Yeah, that's the biggest problem we have right now, strangely enough, is to find enough people who understand battery technology, who understand electric aircraft, who understand electric vehicles and everything. And where we're finding the most luck is to get those people with a lot of EV experience to move over to aviation. So yeah, a lot of jobs. And we've seen that in renewable energy. Obviously, the salaries went up and everything, whereas with traditional energies, it's actually not the case anymore. So yeah, things always change. That's the way it is. And we adapt and we move on and we get better skills and we develop our skills. So this is what the drone industry is doing. So again, Ryan, thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate that. I look forward to our next conversation. And I want to say good luck to you guys. And we'll see
Thank
you soon again. And happy Thanksgiving because it is tomorrow.
Happy Thanksgiving. Yeah. Thank you so much and look forward to our next conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks.